Well, I mean, I love a good archival movie, but this one feels particularly special. And it starts, obviously, with that incredible treasure trove of audio. Can you talk about how that fell into your lap and how you knew it could make a great movie?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you all for coming out. We love this movie so much, and it's so, so, so great to see it with an audience. So really appreciate you all. ABC News had done a podcast based on the book by Julia Zweig. And so they, had the 123 hours of archival audio tapes. And so Jackie Glover, who was at ABC, was the executive at the time, and she had been at HBO before that, and she knew that I had done this series, Bobby Kennedy for President, which was almost all archival, but not quite. And so she knew that I was interested in this period of history. I'd also made a film about John Lewis. And so she just called me up and she was like, do you think this could be a movie? And I was like, well, let's see. Let's do the research. So we started digging into it. And very quickly, I thought, we were talking earlier about, I think a lot of filmmakers dream of the, what's the all archival, what's the right gem? And this really was it for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, you don't do interviews with people. You don't do any observational modern day stuff.
No
It's like
pesky people.
No filming.
Nobody's got COVID.
Go straight into editing, basically.
It was that. It was also Lady Bird is such an astute observer, and she has such a lyrical way and detailed way of describing things, but. Very quickly, we started doing the archival research. We would look for footage. I picked themes. I was interested in civil rights. I was interested in women's rights. I was interested in her being a mother. And so trying to kind of weave all those themes. And so we were looking for archive. And the very first searches, we searched for Lady Bird Johnson, her name, and very little came back. And, we were like, well, that's odd. There shouldn't be 2 pages for the First Lady of the United States. And then if you search Mrs. Johnson, no name, a little bit more. President's wife, really no name, a little bit more. And then, what became clear, and Kim really was, the architect of all of this work, was Lady Bird was a very precise. She was a journalist. She had a degree from University of Texas, and she would note which reporters were at different events. And so then just painstakingly going through those notes, and she would say Nancy Dickerson from NBC News was here, and we'd look up Nancy Dickerson, and there she was, and they didn't even notice her. They didn't note her presence. And so then I was like, fuck that noise. It's only going to be her. It's not going to be any talking heads. It's just going to be her. And I think that this is really a story of so many women who are just not recognized for what they do. And so that really was the kind of impetus for let's let her tell her story, flaws and all.
Kim, when you're absolutely. Kim, when you're handling the archival, I mean, what are you looking for? I mean, you can't just take it all in. You have to go oh, this is maybe this works, maybe this works.
Well, I took it all in, all 123 hours of it. So we obviously knew the big moments. We knew Vietnam, we knew civil rights, we knew the big milestones of LBJ's presidency. But I wanted to, see what else there was. What were the moments that showed them as a couple, as a mother, what she thought about certain things. And, that was kind of what we, went back and forth on. There was so much to really include. But, I think that was kind of, we really had to listen to everything because, she'd be like, today I had an egg and I went swimming and LBJ told me we might have a small war in our hands. So you had to listen, you had to listen to the whole thing because she would just, drop these, gems.
The moment where she says, delightful dinner guests, and then it's Vietnam, and then it's like, whoa.
Yes, McNamara. For dinner.
What surprised you about? I mean, the things you're looking for about her life in the White House, but what surprised you that you learned about Lady Bird going through this?
I think everything surprised me. You know, like I said, I had done probably like between the two different projects, I had spent probably 5 years kind of swimming in archival material from this period, and I didn't know anything about her. And I was like ashamed that like it didn't occur to me that I wasn't seeing her, you know, I wasn't asking the questions about like this other person. So, you know, I knew really intimately, you know, we literally had thousands of hours of Bobby Kennedy. I knew what he thought about Johnson. I knew how he felt. I knew how angered he felt. And then so to have the experience of hearing her say, the Attorney General, you know, you couldn't put a gnat between his hands, you know, like, and so that's kind of like documentary dream, is to have this 360 view of history. And I think it was really important and exciting to not feel like we had to protect her. You know, like she was a full person. She did some things I admired. She did some things I was like, ooh. But I think, you know, I think we could all use a little nuance in our lives, and we could all use a little, you know, just kind of compassion. And I just really enjoyed watching her navigate. She really was a woman in between two very different eras. And she was figuring it out as she went, and she did her best. And that is something that like I admired about her, is like how she fought for her place, and she found it without asking for credit. She didn't need the credit. She wanted to do things actually for the country.
I mean, it sounds like you could find the nuance because she clearly appreciated nuance. And others, she was she could read a room. I mean, really well.
She could really read a room, yeah.
And sometimes she couldn't read a room too, you know, especially towards the end. And I think, you know, Ben Zweig and I, who's our editor, we really tried to think of like inside, outside, like what was happening in her world and what was happening outside in the world. And to try to figure out, you know, sometimes she was, you know, in line with that, and sometimes she wasn't. And I think especially as Vietnam intensified and the critics, you know, got louder and louder and started, you know, attacking LBJ directly, she kind of shut down a little bit and like, you know, didn't want a part of it.
And we had a lot of conversations about that, which is so great for making documentary, because I think also at its core, this movie is a love story. Like the Johnsons loved each other, and you know, we know about the tough, manipulative kind of, you know, Johnson, but I think like this gives like we all have multiple sides, and this gives a side to him as a person who did love his family, even as he wasn't, you know, the best husband all the time.
Yeah, I mean, talk about the depression that this is also the story of a depressive's most, you know, intense carer, basically.
He was really depressed, and she had her moments when she was depressed as well that she talked about in the diaries. And she really did keep him afloat. And I think, you know, we were talking earlier about like what made her so, you know, sets her apart from other first ladies. He could have resigned many a times, and the country was already in turmoil. And like, what would have happened if he just really would have, you know, said, I'm done? Like, you know.
But listening to that archival, and, you know, this is footage that many people have seen many times of LBJ at the lectern, delivering what's very familiar to all of us, a speech to the nation, but then hearing her, you know, simultaneously kind of narrate it. Is he going to reach in his pocket? Is he going to do it? And you're just like, what? I mean, imagine if Joe Biden resigns tomorrow when he addresses the nation. And so like that's like what no. That is, I love Joe Biden. I think he's doing a really great job. But you know, just like that's what I love about like this archival, is you can go back to that time and think about how different history could have been. And thanks to her, and you know, she was really prescient. I mean, she like required that these were embargoed until after her death. She also made Johnson's audio tapes available. And so we have those full, that history for many, many documentarians and historians to listen to. And that was because of Lady Bird's, idea that belongs to the public. We should hear, kind of that history.
Not to get nerdy, but I mean, like, archival movies are, really not just like, you make it look easy, but you're matching words to picture all the time. You're looking at a piece of film and going, does this work with what I wanted? I mean, can you talk about some of that puzzle making aspects of this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a puzzle. I mean, back to the point that, we really had to find the footage to begin with and then be able to match it. But the thing that was so great about Lady Bird, she would fact check herself too. So, when she's reporting something in her diaries, like when we would then go fact check it, it was usually the truth. So we were always kind of able to find news clips or, newspaper headlines, that kind of corresponded to what she was saying. And then there was times where we would find a piece of footage and go try to find the audio diary that matched up to it. For example, the Alabama tenants interview. We just happened to stumble on that, looking for other things. And then we were like, wait a minute, what is this Alabama tenant? And the Alabama tenant story, when we were at South by Southwest, her own family didn't know about the Alabama tenants. Her grandchildren said to us, like, we had no idea there was Alabama tenants. So that was something that the family didn't even know until they saw the film.
Talk more about what the family thought of this.
So we made the film with the help of, so many archival sources, including the Johnson Library, who were, it was like they were just waiting for somebody to come ask, for help. But the Johnson family had not seen it. So Lucy Baines Johnson came to South by Southwest where this premiered with 26 family members, and they were all sitting in the audience. So that was a little stressful. So she stood up at the end and she was really emotional, and she said, "Thank you for giving my mother a voice," and the last word. And one of the things, because we stopped the movie pretty much, after they leave the White House, Lady Bird lost her voice at the end of her life. And so to sit for 90 minutes, she had the stroke, to sit for 90 minutes and just hear their mother, their grandmother, their great grandmother speak, it was very, very emotional for the family. And both daughters have been tremendous. They were so excited. And then Linda, very tragically, had she married Chuck Robb. They came to the DC screening. And so I'm a nerd, so I was like, there's Chuck Robb is DC senators here. But Chuck Robb told us it kind of triggered some memories for him. He was like, LBJ asked me to wear my greens during some of the photographs because he didn't want me to feel like an officer. And I was like, I don't really wear this, but okay. But Linda Bird, their home was destroyed in a fire. And she lost everything. She lost every picture, every memento. And so for her, this is really her time capsule. Like to hear her mother talk about her father was, at her wedding and have those pictures. She doesn't have any pictures anymore.
Yeah, and this fire just happened a year ago and really lost everything. So her daughter came up to us afterwards and was like, thank you for giving my mother a new memory. So.
The voice is so, I mean, how would you describe that voice?
Lyrical, poetic.
It is poetic. It's steely, but it's also kind of there's a lilt to it that's really fascinating. I mean,
I think she's authentic. I think you can tell a lot about what she's thinking. I love when she's like, I want to be wherever he is. She doesn't hide her. And there's a number of things that are, when you talk about Lady Bird to anyone who is familiar with her, they'll say, didn't she plant flowers? And, I try not to get violent because I'm like, yeah, she planted some flowers. But she wasn't doing things, for credit. She was doing things that needed to be done. So I think she's so smart, and she's so strategic. Lucy told us that her parents used to grade each other all the time. Like, she loved that scene. She's like, at dinner, they would literally grade each other, you know, like when she's like, it's a B plus, you know, like, and everyone knows what it's like to get a B plus. You're like, really? What else could I do in the State of the Union?
And then you include, I mean, I love that you include, you know, the voices of Fannie Lou Hamer and Zephyr Wright and Eartha Kitt. The Eartha Kitt scene is great. Or that you had like 3 different viewpoints of one moment. You know, you feel like the cameras and what Eartha Kitt's saying and what Lady Bird's saying. But talk about like including their voices.
I mean, I'm Black. No, you know, I think one of the things that was so fascinating to me is the Johnsons have this very interesting kind of relationship with race. You know, they're both Southerners. Lady Bird grew up, you know, kind of with Black playmates. Her mother had died when she was very young, but she still grew up in a segregated society. And so you see her on the one hand being extraordinarily kind and empathetic to Zephyr, and then you see her being kind of just tone deaf, you know, with Eartha Kitt, who never worked. She that was like pretty much the end of her extraordinary career. And you also see like I'm not even sure if this is in anymore, but you know, she said MLK like lost his appeal you know, later, and that was because she was, you know, it was just like she was upset with the Vietnam protesters. Like, she thought LBJ was doing the right thing, and people who criticized him were, you know, kind of haters. So we felt like it was really important to give the context of what was happening. And look, there's a marked difference. Like, for MLK's death, she goes on and she does that tour, you know, and she's like, you got to buck up. And then you see her for Bobby's funeral, and she's devastated and she's paralyzed. So it's a marked difference. And I think there is where, that's why Archive is so spectacular. And it would not be right to have anybody comment on that. And so I think like we're all left to do what we should, which is like judge for ourselves. What does that mean? It's just that happened. Does that detract from the fact that she, you know, also was very close with Walter White, that LBJ makes him the first mayor of DC? DC had no mayor. You know, that was something LBJ did. He made the first mayor of the District of Columbia, and that stemmed from Lady Bird's friendship with Walter White. And also, like, her first planting flowers was actually kind of in slums of DC for Black children.
Does it feel like you both made a movie with Lady Bird?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Like, we kind of hear her voice, you know, a lot. And, like, this is kind of like, I guess, you know, what happens when you make films like this is like, we'll say things that we think she would say. Okay, that's too much, but
well,
we do.
I also think because, you know, there was a diary entry that she left where she was dubbing over home videos. And she said, I hope these will be useful to a historian one day. So she knew what she was doing, and she left a lot of direction. So I think we followed her lead.
She's the third director.
Yeah.
No residuals.
Yeah, no, but yeah, I think we kind of always thought of her as, you know, the director in a way. You know, she led us to where we needed to go.
Questions? We have somebody with a microphone who's going to hand them to you. So if you can wait. Okay, yes, gentleman here.
Yes, I'm a retired veteran, and to the history, something back then during the Thai offensive, Walter Cronkite made that report, and Lady Bird Johnson was very at odds with him. I don't know if it's anything was reported on that or any on her diary was that, because she think Walter Cronkite did the wrong and not truthful report during the offensive.
She never mentioned that specifically. You know, a fun fact is that Lady Bird and Walter Cronkite wrote on the Daily Texan together at the University of Texas. So they knew each other back when they were in college. I think it was really, you know, everybody to her was getting it wrong at that time. She later went on to have a really good relationship and friendship with Walter Cronkite. So, you know, if there was any animosity towards him on her part. She was able to bury it later on, but they were friends for many, many years.
The microphone's coming to you right there.
A wonderful documentary. I just noticed that you don't mention much about what Lady Bird thought about Nixon or Humphrey, who were in that time period, and that switchover.
Yeah, I mean, she was obviously very focused on LBJ. You saw they literally. She was the person who said what you should do is run for that second term and then leave early and make it clear that you're not going to run again. And that's exactly what happened, which is such a stunning detail of history. So I don't think, if you have to remember that Johnson was in the Senate for so long, and the Senate was a little more collegial than we are today. So, I don't think that they had quite. I don't think that they were quite. There wasn't quite the animosity. You see, she very warmly welcomed. I mean, she's a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. They want the Democrats to win. I do think that her overwhelming relief at it being over kind of took precedence in her mind. I think she was very, very focused. And as you see, she was right. Johnson dies a few years later, and they had that family time because she really wanted him to leave.
And she actually recorded less in the last few months of the presidency. So when, the election was going on, she really wasn't commentating on it. And LBJ was friends with Nixon. They had a really good working relationship, and also, Humphreys as well. So she just didn't really talk about them that much, except my favorite story that's not in when we talk about LBJ.
She also doesn't talk about his many infidelities, except
yes, but what she did talk about was there was a line in a diary entry where she said, "You never know who you'll find in LBJ's bedroom. I walked in and found Richard Nixon." So.
But we couldn't find any archive for that.
Yeah.
As you were listening and going through all the tapes, were there things that almost made the cut but didn't? Were there any moments that you really wish you could have included, but there just wasn't time?
Yeah, there were many. And so, we did, as you see, there were some things we just couldn't resist. So Zephyr got her own treatment, and Eartha Kitt. But there's one particular story that we tried so hard.
Yeah, there's a new one too that I thought of too that I'll share. But the first one, she didn't really think of herself as a feminist, but in 1964 she went to a home economics conference and basically told this group of women at this conference that they should, get out of the house, make their own money, and not rely on their husband for a job. But there's nothing. Not like we read the speech,
so
and I was
hard.
like, "This is amazing." But there was, a little tiny headline that she spoke, at it. So we just couldn't, make that work. But I was thinking about this because we get asked this question a lot, and one of my favorite stories, I think, just shows off her humor. She was actually really, really funny and very just sassy. She got locked out of the residence in her nightgown and had to walk through the White House to get back to the residence. And there had been not a state dinner, but a dinner that night, and people were exiting the White House while she was in her nightgown. And it's just, a really funny, cute story. She had the door, holding with her foot, and it, classic story of it, it's shut and she couldn't get back in. But yeah, I think there was just really, funny stories. There was another one where LBJ, bought her a diamond ring. She had never had a diamond before. And she's like, I guess I'm one of those women now that likes diamonds. So just funny little things like that.
Really enjoyed that. There were two little topics that I saw just kind of hit, and I'm wondering if there was more material you just couldn't include. One was when Lady Bird was addressing Lyndon Johnson's aide, who is accused of potential homosexuality. And then the other was there any sort of acknowledgement of mental health with depression, so sort of the homosexuality and mental health issues?
Yeah.
So the Walter Jenkins story, that's pretty much, what there was about that. We and we love that story. It kind of shows like how she's threading this needle. I wouldn't exactly call her woke on the issue, but she's loyal. And you see Johnson is saying like this can't happen, and he's doing the pure political play, and then she literally said, when she says Abe Fortas was his closest, ally. He then appoints Fortas to the Supreme Court. So when he's like, well, talk to Abe about it. And she's like, my love, it's already settled. And, I think that shows a lot about their relationship, that there were things that she was not going to let him have the last word on that were super important to her. But there wasn't any really, they didn't get more into that. And I think that's also quite indicative of the time, is you deal with something that you think is complicated and you don't quite deal with it. It's also, in my experience, I have a lot of Southern relatives. It's kind of like, bless your heart, just like you're not going to completely go there, but you're going to address things. And then what was the second part?
Mental health.
I mean, I think there's a lot she talks about mental health. She talks about, here's the black beast of depression. That was, there were some things that when you come upon them in the archive, they make you, sit up. And, recently, of course, we were, finishing this and doing all of the plans for it while John Fetterman is, able, thankfully, to be able to describe what is happening and get the treatment that he needs and not have to hide it, although he's not president, So what I really like about that scene is, they clearly know what it is. They clearly have addressed it before. And I just like that it shows kind of how I felt like actually the full weight of I felt the full weight of the presidency when she says that line, but how to get a moment of peace when you're the president of the United States. I thought, that seemed like that's kind of what we wanted to say with this movie is it's kind of like your life is really not your own.
We have time for one more, and it's going to be right up here.
Hi, I know that this story was mostly focused on Lady Bird, but I was just curious because there was a couple moments about Jackie in there, and so I'm just wondering if there was other things about Jackie that didn't make it to the film that she might have talked about, or how she felt about Jackie, or vice versa. So that was kind of my
not really, like not as much as that scene. I mean, she throughout the first few years after JFK's death would go and visit with Jackie, and have lunch and things along those lines. But they did rekindle later on in life. They used to vacation together in Martha's Vineyard, so they did get past all of that later. But no, she respected Jackie. I also think she was really intimidated by Jackie. And also, was able to kind of find her footing. And, Jackie obviously loved, arts. And Lady Bird was really intimidated because she didn't really know that much about art, but would learn. So I think she respected her. And I think that's why she was so caught off guard in that moment. But yeah, they did rekindle later on.
She did say she would describe herself as like the plain brown wren, and Jackie was like in full color. The one thing that we don't have anymore that it was really just for time because we were staying so long in that section, is the only thing that Jackie asked is that could Caroline have her nursery school continue in the White House, and her nursery school was at the top of the White House. And very interesting, it was integrated because there was a black kid who was in that Caroline's nursery school. And Lady Bird was very, very happy to have something that she could do. But when you think about how excruciating the formality of the presidency is and the norms of the presidency, usually you move out with time to plan, and they didn't have any of that. So, she does talk a lot about how am I supposed to navigate this, this widow with two small children, and I have to ask her to move out so that I can she understood like how tragic and horrible it was. And she needed to balance, the country needed to move on before Jackie was ever going to be ready to move on. And so, you know, I felt like we got a lot of insight into her as a person there. And like, that's the kind of thing, I'm glad she embargoed it, you know, that we could look back and think she really did try and muster as much empathy as she could. So I, you know, respected and kind of grieved for both of those mothers.
Well, Dawn, Kim, thank you so much for coming and being so insightful about this wonderful portrait. And the conversation can continue with Dawn and Kim in the reception.
Yes,
So,
and this will be on Hulu November 13th, so tell your friends.
very important.